And we are live. It's Dr. J in the house with Rob Edwards from Heritage Health. We're going to be talking all about protein myths. Does protein hurt your kidneys? We'll go into some of the data on it and what the actual real mechanism is. We'll break it down for you guys so you can understand. Rob, how are you doing today, man? Nice to chat with you.
Good. It's been a long time. It's been a couple
Yeah.
months. It's great
Yeah.
to be back together, man.
Yeah. It's been a bit. And what's your website again? It's
Uh,
heritagehealth.life.
yep, heritagehealth.life. That's it. Yep,
All right,
100%.
heritagehealth.life. And you see patients worldwide on the
Worldwide, yep.
functional consultation. So I'll make sure that we put your website, Rob's site, on there. So it'll be up there now. If you guys want to reach out, it'll all be there. All right, cool. So let's dive in. I get this topic a lot. It's the number one trending thing on my YouTube channel now. And so it's why I chose it. And so we have this myth that's out there, right? That protein causes kidney damage. And the question is, how did that myth happen? Okay. And the reason why it happened is because there's been studies over the years that have been done on chronic disease kidney patients. And they found when the kidney is diseased and its filtration is poor, it may not filter out the protein as well, or maybe there's extra filtration, extra, let's say, protein in the urine. And thus we see higher creatinine, lower glomerular filtration, higher bum. We actually see more kidney stress with more protein because of these earlier kidney studies being done on chronic kidney disease patients.
Yeah, I think 100%. And I think that's a big thing that I think when we look at older studies or even newer studies is whenever we look at things and we try to put them in the context best we can. Oftentimes we get that wrong, especially when we look back at studies that are, back in time regarding to that. Just because something is present doesn't mean that it's the root cause of what's going on.
Yeah, so a couple of studies here I'm going to put. There was a systemic review study, Van Elswick in 2018. High protein increased kidney workload slightly, but caused no damage in healthy adults. And a couple other things. We look at what are some of the big mechanisms of why the kidneys get stressed. So we have a little overview here. I create a little overview. So it kind of keeps us on track because there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about. Insulin resistance drives inflammation and vascular injury, right? The reason why it does that, high levels of insulin cause more sodium retention. More sodium retention tends to increase blood pressure. And the more inflamed your vasculature system is, right? Your cardiovascular system is, the higher the blood pressure. That means more filtration, right? If you have like a cheesecloth and you're filtering something out, but you try to put more pressure through it, you can break it, right? You can bust it. The more pressure you put through it, right? And so this is what's happening in your kidney. So the more filtration we have through the mechanism of high insulin, thus creating endothelial dysfunction. So that can create narrowing of these different structures of the glomeruli, of the blood vessels in the body. That then increases the blood pressure. And as the blood pressure increases, we also are now retaining more sodium because high insulin causes more sodium retention as the fluid goes through the loop of Henle and such. And then more sodium then equals more fluid, then equals more blood pressure. And the more inflammation we have via advanced glycation end products, that's when we sugarcoat proteins via blood sugar. That creates oxidation, right? We think about it at the fancy steak restaurant, right? They pull out the blowtorch, they make the creme brulee with the blowtorch, it starts to brown on top. That is glycation right there in the real world.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think the truth is, we were just mentioned a while ago, is that protein really only stresses out your kidneys if they are already compromised, via like different stages of kidney diseases and things like that. But in healthy people, the study that you're just showing right there, we're not finding that same kind of damage, from that perspective.
Correct. And so again, why do we have some data that says this? So most studies, right, that found protein as being a problem, they were studying it on patients that already had kidney disease. That's number one. Number two is there are studies that show a increase in glomerular filtration, right? That means your kidneys are having to filter more when protein does go up, but that's an acute type of situation. So the longer you go with that study, the more the kidneys will actually adapt. All right. And then also observational studies sometimes find correlation with higher protein. But like I mentioned, the longer we go, or if we factor things like hypertension, that's high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, which means high blood pressure, which typically correlates with more insulin, right? And then
Yeah.
also just making sure we look at the protein sources, right? Because we know the meat at McDonald's that's burnt is different than the grass fed meat. We know fast food's different than the whole food eggs that we have, right? So we know that matters. And also, there can be some nitrates and some preservatives in some of these processed meats that may not be the best, right? And so some of those could be a potential issues. And then I would just say high protein diets, right? The shorter studies, I think, are the big ones. And do you know almost 50% of all people that have kidney transplants? Guess what the root cause of most kidney transplants are, Rob? Do you know?
And the root cause of it,
Yeah. Well,
uh,
the biggest driving factor of, I would say, the majority of kidney transplants.
the biggest driving factor of it, so you mean like what their body's being exposed to?
The biggest mechanism is going to be diabetes. Right?
Oh,
And
okay,
then the
yeah,
question is, what's harmful, right? Is it just the high blood sugar? Because it's not just the high blood sugar, it's also the high insulin. So insulin in and of itself, when it's high, is inflammatory. Number one, insulin in and of itself causes
yeah,
higher, more filtration. So then you reabsorb the sodium. And then when that happens, then you increase the blood pressure. And then that puts more stress on the kidney. So it's a vicious cycle. So let's kind of go over our overview here. So, what are some of the big mechanisms driving kidney damage? So, high blood sugar and diabetes. And so the problem is diabetes is a state of chronically high blood sugar. That's like, 126 mg per DL or higher. But we know we have patients showing functional dysglycemia problems very early on. And if we have ways to look at blood sugar before we're 5 or 10 years in, because it may take that long for diabetes to show, now we can pivot and make changes, not lose a whole decade.
yeah. And I think that's a huge thing. Like there, it used to be that practitioners thought we couldn't even reverse it at all, and
Correct.
now obviously we can. We do it all the time from type 2 reversing. Type 1 is different, but when we talk about high blood sugar and what causes damage or resistance at a cellular level, right? Glucose, excess glucose, sugars, but also processed foods, toxins, and things of that nature, which we'll go into a little bit later as we're going down these other things that stress out, the body and produce these things.
And also, when diabetes was originally looked at, right? Um, Gary Taubes came out with a great book in the last year called Rethinking Diabetes. It's pretty heady, but it's like, it's detailed, but it's very good. When diabetes first came out, right, it was called diabetes mellitus. And essentially,
Mhm. I
that
remember that.
essentially means sweet urine, right? Mellitus
Yeah.
means sweet urine. And so it originally was picked up. You'd have to have blood sugar very high for sugar to be dumped into the urine. Okay. So normally, like, it's 126, right? But you'd have to have blood sugar well into the 140s, 150s, 160s, 170s chronically. And there was a doctor, right? Someone's job was to go in and actually taste your urine. Imagine having that job. I'm not sure you could pay me enough, right? So someone would go in there and they'd take specimens of the urine and they literally taste it, which is crazy. But the problem is, for your blood sugar to be that high and for your kidneys to be that beaten up where it cannot filter out the sugar, right? And it's using the kidneys to filter it out. We got problems, right? And so that's kind of how diabetes started with the kidneys, where the kidneys literally could not filter it out. And so we have the sugar kind of being a problem in and of itself. And then we have the insulin, and then we have the high blood sugar. Now, the high blood pressure comes next because one thing is the more we inflame the kidneys, that creates nephrosclerosis. So we have nephro, these are the functional or the glomeruli, right? These are the functional filtration units in the kidneys. And then sclerosis means to narrow. And so as that happens, we have less blood flow. And then with the high levels of insulin, we actually start to reabsorb more sodium, and that causes more blood pressure. And so a lot of times people talked about blood pressure and salt being a problem. It really isn't a problem. It's only a problem when insulin is very high. Now you're reabsorbing it. So salt in and of itself is totally fine, especially if it's a good quality sea salt. But the difference is you will see lots of salt in processed food. And so the question is it the salt or is it the processed food? And again, salt, when it's higher with processed food, with extra sugar, yeah, it definitely could be a little problematic. But if you get the insulin in check, healthy sea salt is going to be fine.
Yeah, because and then that's part of more of the root cause conversation. Because even in diabetes or high blood pressure, those aren't necessarily root cause; those are mechanisms that will affect, of course, the kidneys and those kind of things. But from a
Yeah.
root cause perspective, yeah, 100% is, still good salts, minerals, and things of that nature is what our body needs. And glucose, I think we're over. I don't know what the number is now. I think it used to be like we used to eat something like 2 or 3 bags, equivalent of 2 or 3 bags of sugar, back in like the 100, 200 years ago. Now we're at something like 98 bags or something like that on average as Americans. And so that's going to push all of those things into overdrive, which is going to start to affect your kidney function.
Yeah, and I'd also say just nutrient density, like just not having good antioxidants in our diet, not having good vitamin C, good nutrients from our vegetables, from our healthy fatty acids, just not having the nutrition, right? Healthy nutrients, healthy antioxidants, healthy compounds are going to be good. They're going to help starve off the extra oxidative stress, right? Oxidation is nothing more than losing an electron, right? I remember in like what was it UMass? I think
Yeah.
one of the biochemistry classes I took, one of the biggest mnemonic devices we used was oil rig, right? Oxidation is a loss, reduction is a gain. I still
Yep.
use that today because you think
Yeah.
like, oh, like you're
Reduction. Yeah.
reducing. It's like, well, you're losing. It's like no. Reduction
No.
is actually a gain. It's talking about the charge, right? Because
Yeah.
a electrons are negative. So if you're essentially if you're gaining it, your charge is actually getting more negative. So you're reducing the charge, right? Because you're making it more negative. So it's more has to do with the charge, not the amount, right? And so that happens. Let's just say with an apple or an avocado, you cut it open, you leave it on the counter,
Yeah.
come back 3 6 hours later, it starts to get brown, right? Little trick, you can squeeze a little bit of organic lemon or lime on that. That's the citric acid. Vitamin C will help prevent the oxidation from happening.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's where, we get into sort of antioxidants to try to deal with the oxidative process, which is what a lot of people, underlying factor with a lot of people that I work with, and you too, is over oxidation at a cellular level. It just displays in different areas of the body. But antioxidants, good foods, whole food, properly dense, properly prepared foods, those are the most important things that your cells can actually use to start to repair and rebuild. And the more damage you have, that's where I tell people, like, get into more like the soups and the bovine and
Correct.
and kind of more things that are more bioavailable to your cells and more bioavailable to your body and easier on your kidneys too.
Yeah, and again, when you have kidney disease, you have to be careful with electrolytes because your body may not have the optimal ability to regulate them and excrete them. And so you
Mhm.
may overaccumulate potassium or sodium. So if you are in that like kidney disease kind of range, you may want to run a metabolic panel more frequently. That's good to look at just so you can get a sense of where your electrolytes are because it's hard for people to get enough potassium or magnesium. You probably need some supplementation. And so it's good to look at it just to make sure you're not overdoing it because extreme high and low with kidney issue with potassium could look the same. Also,
Mm,
next, when we
okay.
test, how do we test kidney stuff, right? So we can run a metabolic panel. We look at BUN, that's blood urea nitrogen. That's looking at a protein byproduct that can go up with exercise, with more protein. But usually with more kidney damage, it could go higher. Creatinine's one. That's another amino. It's kind of their kidney protein breakdown. So the higher that goes, the more protein breakdown we have and the more we're excreting protein out. It can also go up higher with exercise. And so, if you're doing one of these tests, make sure you're not making yourself feel overly sore or tired at the gym within 2 to 3 days before the test. I'm not saying you can't work out, just keep it so you're whatever you're doing, you're not really feeling tired or icky or fatigued the next couple of days. And
Mm,
then, so we have BUN, we have creatinine, we can look at serum protein. So, BUN should be usually around like mid teens. Creatinine is usually zero point 0.6 to like low ones. Once it goes above 1.1, it's usually high. Then we have our serum protein, which is usually like, 6.9 to low sevens is usually pretty good. And then we have another marker that's more functional. It's called cystatin C. Cystatin C is a great marker to look at because it looks more at protein retention from proteins in the kidney. And so it's not as influenced by dietary protein, it's not as influenced by muscle breakdown. So it gives you a pretty good window into glomerular filtration independent of muscle breakdown and external dietary proteins. So it's looking at this protein in the kidneys. So cystatin C is a great one. And the next one is uric acid. Uric acid's good too
mm,
because uric acid can go up with excess carbs and excess fructose. So this next bullet here, excess fructose, high levels of fructose can increase uric acid. Uric acid, when it's high, can inhibit an enzyme called carnitine palmitotransferase 1, CPT1. And that enzyme is very important for using carnitine to shuttle fatty acids in the mitochondria to burn them. And so that means you're less likely to be able to utilize fats for fuel. And that then increases your risk for non alcoholic fatty liver.
yeah. So the excess fructose processed foods. with the uric acid, I've actually never looked into that. So that's what test are you
The
suggesting?
doctor to look at is Dr. Johnson, Richard Johnson, out of the University of Colorado. He's done studies on uric acid and its connection to fructose. And so the mechanism is like high fructose, right? Fructose, you have high fructose corn syrup, which is 55, 45,
Yeah.
55% fructose, 45% glucose. Glucose primarily goes to the muscles to get metabolized, 80%, right? Fructose primarily goes to the liver. The difference with fructose is the liver is a much smaller site for storage. Your
Yep.
muscles are bigger. And so you have less storage. So you're more prone to that liver being full. And then what happens next? That liver can become fatty and insulin resistance starts.
Yep.
Plus, when you're consuming fructose, and again, not fructose from fruit per se, but more fructose from high fructose corn syrup, you
Yep.
don't get leptin secretion. And so leptin allows you to feel full and satiated. So you don't get good leptin secretion. So it's very easy to overeat when we're dealing with added high fructose corn syrup. So people are
Mm.
like, oh, it's just willpower, we just count your calories. It's like, well, no, there's a mechanism where appetite and satiation and neuropeptides are involved. And if you eat foods over here that allow you to feel full, willpower doesn't have to come in as much. But if you eat these foods that are bad and then you don't get the satiation signal, this is how and why it's very easy to overeat. And that's why it's not just a calorie thing,
Yep.
because your neurotransmitters, neuropeptides, and hormones are stronger than willpower.
Yeah, signaling, because it's signaling. It's, it's kind of
Mhm.
more like, it's sort of more of a the way I think about it is it's sort of, subconscious kind of thinking. It's not something that you're thinking about, but it's something that your body's doing. It's kinda like whenever you go to
Right.
like if you go to a Mexican restaurant, right, and they give you, like, free chips and salsa with all the high fructose corn syrup, glazed on those chips and everything else, highly processed, and, you're gonna get hungry again, very shortly thereafter versus if you were to eat, like, a whole food thing, like, you can't sit down and eat, like, 4 apples. Just not gonna happen. Like, you're gonna get full. It's
Plus,
normal
you get the
kind of.
fiber. You get the fiber with it as well, so that makes you feel a little bit full. That creates, those stretch receptors. It stimulates them, and then you get some nutrients, some vitamin C and such.
Yeah, that separation though, that's actually I've heard that before, but I'm glad that you brought it up. So the differentiation between fructose versus other types of sugars are acting differently on the body. So one is sort of suggestively going towards the liver and making it predisposed for fatty liver disease, which I don't know what the exact numbers are now for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, but that's pretty high, higher than it should be, and it's not even wasn't even a diagnosis, 10, 15
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah, here are
You
the
know?
numbers. Write it down. So when your ALT and AST, alanine aminotransferase or aspartate aminotransferase, start to creep above 30, it could start to be an issue. Right? It could start to be an issue, right? And then, of course, you can always confirm it with the ultrasound. You can also run your fasting insulin, right? Fasting insulin above 10, but usually you're going to start to see it into the teens. That can be a problem.
Mm,
And oh yeah, here's the dirty secret that restaurants do, right? It's the same thing every time. Once you understand it, you can kind of hack it. So what
yeah.
restaurants do? What's the first thing they do when they come to your table? They get your drink order, right? And ideally, if you're consuming alcohol, what does alcohol do to your blood sugar?
Yeah,
It
raises it.
lowers it. It actually lowers it. It actually, if you're talking like most alcohol actually lowers it, unless it's like a lot of added sugar to the drink. Most alcohol lowers it. And you can go talk to a type 1 diabetic. They know this because type 1 diabetics typically have to account for alcohol because it can lower their blood sugar and they actually have to give less insulin. Because if they're keeping their insulin the same and their blood sugar is dropping, they could actually go more hypoglycemic. And so what's happening is you're lowering blood sugar. That can then start to create more cravings. And then they're typically offering you some kind of carbohydrate, whether it's bread or pretzels, right? And then that creates this blood sugar roller coaster. And then now your cravings are up. Now you over order food. Now you over order dessert, right? And all that stuff, right? And so it creates this roller coaster of your, eyes becoming bigger than your stomach, so to speak. So I tell people, if you want to eat right away, try to have mineral water first and maybe order like a shrimp cocktail or some oysters, something that's nutrient dense and better protein. That stabilizes your blood sugar. And then if you want something after that, that's usually a better time to do it.
Yeah, that's great. That's good advice.
Yeah.
Um, Plus, you'll save a lot of money doing it that way too, which
Yeah.
which will lower your cortisol levels because you won't be so stressed.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Let's talk about medications, PPIs. This is a big one. There was a
Yeah,
study, I think it's a
100%.
Cochrane systemic review that came out last fall on there being a correlation with these type of medications and impacting the kidneys. and they saw more of a correlation with chronic kidney patients. But we know these medications could be harmful on the kidneys. They could be a stressor. And these medications are a big deal because people, when they go on them, they could be on them for years or decades. And so it's not like, oh, I
Long
just
time.
used it like an ibuprofen for like a day because I was sore. No, you're on them for life now. And so that's a big deal with PPIs. Give me your take on PPIs, Rob.
Well, I think I mean, PPIs do a lot of potential damage to the body. I mean, I can understand whenever somebody gets, chronic inflammation that they're trying to. The initial idea is to get the damaged off of the esophageal area so that you're not predisposed for cancer. So that's why they do it, right? But the downstream effects of that is whenever you're utilizing it, you don't create enough hydrochloric acid inside of your stomach. And now you can't absorb your nutrients properly. You start having gut infections. And from there, we're going to have a onslaught of issues. Most issues that we see, and I think you would agree with this, tend to start in the gut. And then there's a downstream effect to that as things get into the bloodstream. But yeah, the PPIs, affecting kidney long term. Yeah, because people will be on that stuff for 15, 20 years. I mean, they'll be on it every single day, 15, 20 years, because they have a long standing gut infection. They have a long standing issue going on that they've just never addressed.
100%. And then the question is, what's the mechanism, right? Um, what is the mechanism? Why are the kidneys hurting? Like, why is that happening, right? And so when you look at it, a couple of things. So this is a big deal. So number one, it's reducing magnesium and mineral absorption, right? And so without magnesium, without calcium, without potassium, minerals are very important. So low magnesium can stress out the kidneys. What does magnesium do naturally? It keeps blood pressure down. It's a natural beta blocker, right? And so that means it relaxes the heart, right? And when the heart's more relaxed, what happens to blood pressure? It drops. When blood pressure is lower, what's happening to the kidney filtration stress? It's dropping, right?
Mhm.
Next, it's oxidative stress, right? PPIs can produce reactive oxygen species. So think of that pro oxidation, and that can impact the renal tubules and trigger like fibrosis and scarring and narrowing. Also, there's studies on interstitial nephritis, so autoimmune like reactions where the immune system can get triggered and can start to attack the kidneys. And if it's long term, that can impair it. And there's
Yep.
also studies on gut microbiome and how SIBO and bacterial overgrowth and LPS and gut inflammation can impact the kidneys. And that's the big one. It's the biggest one. Really, it's the ongoing low grade inflammation followed by nutrient depletion, followed by oxidative stress. And then, of course, if you add insulin and blood sugar, it just continues to get worse and worse over time.
Yeah, it's sort of like this, getting back to the root cause, of everything, and a lot of the issues comes down to, again, all the other things we've been talking about is the food intake that you're bringing into your body, your small intestine's ability to break all that down and utilize it in your body, and how much pressure, how much stress is on your kidneys to have to deal with
Yeah.
these things. Um,
Yeah, and if you guys like these podcasts like this, I'm putting the screen up just because there's a lot of things I want to hit, and if we do this, it just guarantees we don't miss anything, and it kind of keeps us on course. If you guys like it, let us know in the comments. Appreciate it. So dehydration and mineral issues. Let's talk about electrolytes and just patients being dehydrated. Rob.
yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the number one things that I think most of the people that I see deal with. They don't get enough hydration. They want to, they desire to, or they don't feel like they're actually able to absorb it. One of the two. They drink it. They don't feel like their cells are actually able to take it in again, which is another potential sign of malabsorption issue inside of the gut or
Correct.
something of that nature. But, so I think that's a big deal. Our cells can't work properly. Our body can't work properly if we're underhydrated. I think when we're born, we're at like what, 50, we're like 88% water or something, very high percentage. As we get older,
Hmm.
I think past 65, I was reading something the other day. I think we're closer to something like, 60%. And so especially as we get older, hydration is a huge issue inside of our body. Our body can't communicate electrical signals if we don't have the water there for it to do it.
And the electrolytes are important because our cells require that sodium potassium pump to work, right? Potassium in, sodium out, and that's how the cells membranes work and communicate. And so it's hard to get enough potassium. You need 4,700 milligrams a day, and most people don't get close to that. You know,
Yeah. Yep.
it's a big deal.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see here. Toxins and heavy metals can be a big deal, right? Whether it's lead, whether it's cadmium, arsenic, aluminum, mercury, these can all be problems. So that's a big deal. Also, mold toxins can be really hard on the kidneys, and glyphosate. So for eating,
Yep.
a bunch of pesticide-ridden food, GMO food, these could be hard things. If you're living in a moldy home, it's unaddressed. That can be a problem thing too. Also, quality proteins. Are we getting grass-fed meat, or is it junky processed protein powders? Is it a bunch of soy protein? What about that? So hopefully we cleared up the protein myth, right? Eating protein does not wreck your kidneys, right? Kidneys can handle protein just fine. The real threat is the insulin resistance, the blood sugar, the toxins, the inflammation, the oxidative stress. And then, of course, what drives that? The gut can be a big thing. Medications can be a big thing. Nutrient deficiencies can be a big thing, right? And then, really, only advanced kidney disease patients need to be on top of their protein, and they need to be on
Yep.
top of their electrolytes too. They may need magnesium and potassium and sodium, but they have to be very careful with it because their body may have a hard time excreting it and it may go too high. So you really have to be on top of it. Here's some of the big studies I saw, right? The Van Elswyk study, the Cosmos study, looking at insulin and looking at high protein and no damage. And then also one study on hypertension and chronic inflammation are the major dependent risk factors of chronic kidney disease. And so, big takeaway, right? Blood sugar, blood pressure, inflammation, truth. That's medication, toxins, big threats. Dehydration. Also, this can be a double-edged sword because you can be drinking a whole bunch of water with your protein, and that may lower your stomach acid and make it harder for you to break your protein down. So make sure you're not overly hydrating with your food. And then focus on quality protein. How much? I say anywhere between a half a gram to 1 gram per pound of body weight is pretty reasonable. If you're totally sedentary, probably 1 gram is okay. But I would say even zero point 0.6 to 0.7 is probably better on the low end, and then up to 1 on the high end, unless you're doing a lot of lifting. Professional athletes may even be at 1.5 grams per protein per pound. So it just depends upon stress on your body.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the final word there, I like what they're saying. That's exactly true, though, is that like protein is not the enemy. Now, it's more difficult. It can seem like it's the enemy in somebody that's like stage 4 kidney failure, stage 5, but that's because we're now in a situation where the kidney is just super sensitive. You have to watch it. You have to, if you're going to come back from that, you have to watch that. But otherwise, we're looking at root cause situations, right? We're looking at more balancing the blood sugar. We're looking at managing certain things upstream in that nature versus kidneys itself. We talked about this earlier before our podcast, is that so many times we're still stuck in this Western way of thinking of like, how do I fix my kidneys? How do I fix my kidneys? How do I fix my kidneys? And it's really, root cause is very rarely the kidney itself. It's the amount of stress that the kidney has to deal with on a daily
Yes.
basis.
Yes. I agree. And we see patients that have kidney issues all the time. Big tests that we'll run. We'll look at creatinine. We'll look at BUN. We'll look at glomerular filtration, right? These are good markers, serum protein. We'll look at albumin or globulin, and then we'll look at cystatin C. And then we'll also look at fasting insulin. We'll do
Yep.
what's called a functional glucose tolerance test because I can pick up insulin resistance on one of these bad boys easily. We
Yeah.
just test our blood sugar fasting, right? We got our meter, we got our little lancet, and then we have our blood sugar test, and we do a fasting reading. We want to be below 100 fasting. That means you haven't eaten for at least 4 hours. And then we want to be not ideally higher than 120 in the first hour,
Mhm.
140 max, but definitely ideally under 120. And then hour 2, ideally back below 100. And then definitely hour 3 below 100. That starts to tell us when our blood sugar starts to go up and take longer to come down. That tells us we're starting to move into the insulin resistance camp. And again, the big
Mhm.
things that we do are 3 major things. First off, we work on restricting carbohydrates, especially more processed and higher glycemic. 2, we make sure food is anti-inflammatory, keeping gluten and processed, foods out that could be more on the inflammatory side. And then second, we're going to be adding in some movement after meals. A simple 5 or 10-minute walk can lower blood sugar 10 points. And then after that would be blood sugar nutrients. So my line, we use a product called Glucose Supreme. That's going to have, different B vitamins, alpha lipoic acid, vanadium, chromium, magnesium, right? You can use different herbs like gymnema, bitter melon, cinnamon. These are all herbs that are shown to help modulate blood sugar. And there are also some good nutrients that can be very helpful for kidneys. Cordyceps mushrooms can be good for the kidneys too. Champignon mushroom can be good.
Yeah.
Astragalus can be interesting. Ginseng can be good. Again, these compounds are not going to be like something that you want to just do in and of itself. You want to work on all the foundational things first, and that could be like the cherry on top of the cake. So just an order of operations of what it will be the most important thing. Those would be at the end.
Yeah. 100%. And I think that, it's really about identifying, one is the healing opportunities, and two, identifying like what are the, interferences. that are getting in play in terms of your cells and your tissues and your kidneys and everything else running properly inside of your body. Um, but yeah, that's great, man.
So blood tests to look at, like I mentioned, a metabolic panel, which will include your bun, creatinine, your serum protein, your glomerular filtration. Cystatin C is usually an add-on. Fasting insulin is usually an add-on. Usually uric acid comes in a metabolic panel most of the time too. So those are good ones to look at out of the gates. And then your blood sugar meter here, justinhealth.com/keto hyphen mojo.
Yep.
Keto hyphen mojo.
Yep.
Anything else you want to highlight there, Rob?
No, I think it really comes down to, I think it's the takeaway for me in most of these conversations is understanding that most of the time when somebody has a kidney issue, it's I don't know if I've ever had anybody that had an isolated kidney issue and that was the only issue that they had. Um,
Correct.
it's a downstream issue. It's a filtration, right? It filters out certain things in your body. And when there's too many mechanisms pressing on it, there's too much stress inside of the body. Um, Eventually, your kidneys are going to get damaged. Eventually, you are going to have liver issues going on. Eventually, you're going to have gut signs going on, right? That's what's going to happen.
Correct. Correct. Oh, and that link is justinhealth.com/keto mojo without a hyphen. So KETOMOJO. That's a good blood sugar meter. I like it because it connects Bluetooth to your phone and then you get graphs. So you can look at it and you can kind of graph it out and it makes it nice. Someone wrote in, how do you discern, test if kidney tissues are caused by autoimmune? Usually people like that are going to have positive ANA, right? And they're going to have some other systemic inflammatory markers and maybe other autoimmune issues. 78% of the population who has autoimmune issues, they have polyglandular autoimmune syndrome, meaning they have multiple autoimmune issues. So where there's smoke, there's fire. If there's already one, then we could
Yeah,
assume that's at
more.
play. And then usually an ANA and some other systemic inflammatory markers like your HSCRP will also be high, and or erythrocyte sedimentation rate, ESR.
Yeah, markers all over your body that you can test to see where you might be able to find or identify autoimmunity going on within the body. But I think that's true too. Is that and it makes sense, right? That it's polyglandular. That if you find one in one place, it's highly unlikely you're not going to find autoimmune reactivity anywhere else inside the body.
Yeah, and again, if you catch it early on, it may just not be bad enough inflammation has accumulated, and where it's showing signs and symptoms, and so that's good. We want to catch it early, so if it's brewing, right, we can kind of get it sequestered and knock it down.
Yeah, reverse it sooner than later. That's what I tell everybody.
Well,
Yesterday,
yep.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I always tell people, I was like, when's the best time to get started? And it's like, well, yesterday was too late, and tomorrow, no, wait, tomorrow's too late. Yesterday was too, I don't know. Basically, essentially, get started in terms of your health.
Exactly. That old adage is there's no better time than now, and an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? Because these things take the problem with these kind of physiological imbalances, right? They take years and or decades to
Yeah,
accumulate. So when someone comes in with an issue, it's not like this just started last week. And that's the hardest thing because
exactly.
most patients
Yeah,
they correlate the symptom or like, oh, now my kidney markers are out of whack as like it just started. It's like probably not. And that's the
yeah,
hardest thing for
yeah,
patients to kind of wrap their heads around is conventional medicine uses very late stage indicators for disease and for pathophysiology. And people just think, oh, this just started. This is a new diagnosis for me. It's like, well, the imbalance has been going on for quite a while. And that's what we try to get patients to understand, that we don't want to be chasing symptoms. We want to be looking at upstream and look at markers that tell us optimal function and or suboptimal function. And we can assume that the longer things are suboptimal, the more we're progressing towards a disease pathophysiology state.
yeah. It's sort of that idea of normal function, dysfunction, and disease. And most of the time, traditional medicine waits until you're about disease stage before they ever do anything about it. But you've been dysfunctional for years.
Correct. And then someone wrote in, is type 1 diabetes reversible? The biggest issue with type 1 diabetes with kidney problems is you have the control in how much insulin you give. But conventional dietitians and conventional doctors, they tend to have patients just use as much insulin as they need to cover up their blood sugar and bring their blood sugar down. But then you have the side effects of too much insulin. And so I
Yeah,
tell patients who are type 1 diabetics, the goal should be to use the least amount of insulin, somewhere between 10 to 20 units total for the whole day, um, to keep your blood sugar in a healthy range, right? Ideally back below 100 or within 3 or so hours after a meal, without impacting your kidneys and without making your blood sugar high. That should be the goal. Because if you don't use enough insulin. Well, now your blood sugar is high. That's also stressful on your kidneys. So you
Yeah.
need kind of that, that in between situation there, right? You need to have that in between, because if your blood sugar goes too high and your insulin's low, then that blood sugar can't get into your cell. So it's like being in the ocean. You have all this water around you, but you can't drink it, right? It's like you have all this glucose, this energy, but you can't use it because insulin brings it into the cell. And so what happens is your body then goes into a ketoacidosis state, right? Not ketosis, where your ketones are like around 1, 2, or 3, but more like 20 or 30. And that's because your body's trying to generate fuel because all that glucose is locked away. And that high level of ketones, 10x plus what normal ketones are, that really can shift your pH in a negative way. And then again, a lot of our enzymes in our body are regulated based on pH. And so if our pH goes too low, it could put us in a coma.
Yeah. Well said.
Well, anything else you want to highlight, Rob?
I think we kind of covered it. I think that's. I think we've smashed that protein down and kind of made that more understandable for people. Hopefully, it was a great conversation. I think that the name of the game of this whole thing is getting ahead of it. What I meant to say is the best time to get started was yesterday, and the worst time is tomorrow.
Yes, exactly.
You know.
Exactly. Take action now, right? It's not about knowledge is power, applied knowledge, meaning you got to do something with this information. It's kind of a big data dump on this podcast, but if you just take one thing away from it, then you're going on that right path. So links to Rob's site is heritagehealth.life, life. They'll be linked below, and myself, Dr. J, justinhealth.com. There'll be a Work Dr. J button on there. You can click. We see patients worldwide. So if you want that support, we are here to help, guys. You guys have an awesome day and love to see your comments down below. Take care, y'all.